Hello, fancy folks. Welcome back to another episode of LuxeSci. Today, we're continuing our interview series by talking with Sam from the Tiny Matters podcast. Sam Jones is the executive producer and co-host of the science podcast Tiny Matters. She's also a freelance science journalist, having written for outlets including the New York Times, the Washington Post, National Geographic, Scientific American, and Nature. Before Tiny Matters, Sam was the writer and host of a PBS and American Chemical Society chemistry video series called Reactions, and an assistant editor at the magazine Chemical and Engineering News. She completed a PhD in biomedical science in 2018 at the University of California, San Diego. The Tiny Matters podcast is all about the small things that have a big impact. Their most recent episode is about textile conservation, is super informative and super interesting. So welcome, Sam. We're so glad to have you here.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
We're continuing our series of science communicators and things that they think are luxurious. And we'll get into your topic soon, but I wanted to ask a few questions about you first. So how did you first get interested in science?
Yeah, so my dad was a science teacher, and so I think that was a big part of it. And he's also just someone who's generally loves science, consumes a ton of science content. And so I feel like he, had me outdoors looking at stuff. I grew up next to a river, so there was a lot of
nice.
looking for things in the water, looking for things on the riverbank. So I think that was a big part of it. But I think also a lot of the science stuff, I found it interesting, but it just kind of clicked for me. It felt very natural to be learning about it and to be asking those questions. And so I think that drew me to it as well. And I actually became super obsessed with medical history and kind of morbid stuff very young. As a 10-year-old, I had this forensics book where I learned about the history of blood spatter analysis and ballistics and the beginning of DNA testing. And it was all through these pivotal crimes and homicides. So some of the stories were maybe not super appropriate for a 10-year-old to be reading, but I was really captivated by how science could solve these kinds of crimes and mysteries.
That's so cool. Yeah, and very apparently on trend given the large interest in true crime stories.
Yeah,
now.
I was a couple decades ahead of the curve on that one.
Yeah. So how did the podcast come about?
So thank you for, my intro and introducing the podcast. So like you said, it's a science podcast about small things. So, a gene, a microbe, a molecule that make a big impact on our world. Tiny Matters spans the fields of, so it's a production of the American Chemical Society, but it spans the fields of chemistry, but also biology, physics, astronomy, the list goes on. So it really is more general sciences. And I think that reflects my interest in science, which is vast and changing constantly. And so the motivation, of course, was that I love science. I love diving into the nitty gritty, but I also like thinking about science in the context of what's happening now, but also what has happened. So when the American Chemical Society gave me the opportunity to pitch a science podcast, I knew I wanted to do something that would encompass more than just the science. So, science, history, society, they're so deeply intertwined. And in Tiny Matters, we don't steer away from that reality. In fact, we embrace it. And fortunately, we found that our listeners embrace it as well. Yeah. So my co-host, Deboki, and I, we both come from academic backgrounds. She has a PhD in biomedical engineering. Like you mentioned, I have a PhD in biomedical science. It was really in graduate school that I think both of us saw how problematic it could be for science to be viewed as this standalone entity that was safe from critique. Science absolutely brings the world so much joy and so much good, but not always and not in every context. And so I think being transparent about that is essential. And so I hope that we can kind of bring the excitement, but also the complexity of science in our episodes of Tiny Matters.
I absolutely think you do. And it jives so well with what kind of our values here at LuxeSci, which is that science underpins pretty much everything in life, including things you don't think it does, like luxury items, right? Science is kind of everywhere, and that's super cool. And it is also ingrained in history and all these other things. And so I really appreciate that aspect of your podcast as well. And I loved the most recent episode because I, too, am a huge fan of the Met Gala.
Oh, Deboki will be so glad to hear that.
So surprise question, if you can. Did you have a favorite Met Gala look?
Oh my gosh. I'm not a big Met Gala person. Like, so the Met Gala person between Deboki and I is 100% Deboki. So like, she would be the best person to answer this. I did think it was cool, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that Zendaya had a couple looks and I thought they were both really cool. And so I think I'm also just kind of a fan, but I really thought that both were so beautiful and intricate. Yes. And so I'll say that. Yeah.
Yeah. Her first look was definitely my favorite.
Okay.
And I appreciated not every year are the attendees so on theme. I feel like this year, a lot of people nailed a theme.
Okay. Nice.
Yeah. I'm one of those people, if you give me a theme, I'm going all in. So.
That's great.
Okay. What luxury item did you pick and why?
Okay, so I picked vampire facials. I picked them because I guess first off, they've grown a lot, I think, in popularity over the last few years. And so I wanted to understand, first off, what they are. Second, how they're supposed to work. And also, they're definitely what I would consider a luxury item because they're not cheap. In the US, at least, each treatment session can range from like $250 to $1,500. But really, most legitimate places are closer to $1,000 plus. And I do say legitimate because actually, just after I had connected with you and decided that this is what I wanted to talk about on today's episode, there was news that came out that 3 women who went to this spa in New Mexico for their vampire facials actually contracted HIV from it. So apparently the spa was unlicensed. There was a lot of stuff going on there. So not trying to super freak people out, but just a reminder that like it's important to go to someone who is licensed and is using clean needles and equipment and all of that. So yes, so I think that this is a topic that's like been in the news quite a bit lately, in addition to it becoming more popular.
Yeah. And the last I read, they were still trying to sort of figure out what happened at that spa in terms of like who was an like index case and like where did it come from. I don't know if you've heard anything more updated.
Yeah, the last update I saw was from the end of April. So probably whatever you saw was what I saw, but they were able to definitely trace it back to this one spa and found out that it was unlicensed, but they didn't, at that point, they didn't seem to know exactly when or where the transmission happened in the process. But and I'm happy to chat about the process itself, unless you want to.
No, let's dive into it because it is fascinating. And as we talk about it, I think it'll be clearer how that potential transmission could happen.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So like as I was starting the research on this, I was like, I wonder if the name is as scary or less scary than what it actually is. And I feel like it's both. It just depends on how you feel about blood and needles.
Yes.
So a vampire facial is a combo of microneedling plus platelet-rich plasma. How it works very generally is that you have a vial of blood that's drawn from your arm, and then it's spun in a machine called a centrifuge that really just spins that, spins the sample really, really fast and separates different blood components out by density. So like it separates your red and white blood cells from your plasma and the platelets in your plasma. And so then once you have separated out the blood, you pull out the platelet-rich plasma, or PRP, which is always such a mouthful.
Yeah.
And then a microneedling device is used on your face, like after putting some numbing cream, typically, which like, thank goodness. But essentially it's used to create a bunch of tiny holes in your face. So like microneedling face tools, I've seen them described as looking like lint rollers with tiny needles sticking out of them. But microneedling is used for a variety of things. But for vampire facials, it's essentially used first. And then after that, once you've been microneedled, that layer of PRP, which is yours, it's your platelet-rich plasma, is then smeared onto your skin. And so you can imagine if you have like these little holes that have been put in your face by the microneedling device, and then you're smearing stuff all over it, like you're going to get this smearing of blood. And that is where the name vampire facial comes from. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I've seen a picture of one of the Kardashians having done it.
Yes. Yeah. The pictures are like, if you're someone who like blood kind of weirds you out, like this is not something to Google. I think it's not pretty. Like it doesn't look great.
No, but neither does a chemical peel, to be honest. So
no.
Yeah, it's interesting, the microneedle aspect of it. So recently there was news out of a really big trial in sub-Saharan Africa for microneedle patches for vaccine delivery for infants. And so this is really huge because, part of some of the kind of hesitancy or kind of about vaccines is the needle, right? And if you're doing multiple vaccines, it's multiple needles, and you're looking at your baby going, oh my gosh. So these little patches with like really tiny needles, and then there is vaccine both on the patch and in the needle. And so you just put the patch on and leave it there for a pre-specified amount of time. And that delivers the vaccine both immediately and slowly over time. And they just tested it with measles and rubella. And they found it to be equally effective as a syringe needle. So,
oh, wow. That's amazing.
Not painful. Like they're so tiny, right? Like you don't really, it's not, I think the microneedles for the face are deeper because you're trying to like get something to sink in, whereas opposed to like having the vaccine on the little microneedles, it allows it to be less painful.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's such a great use of microneedles.
I know. Sorry, tangent. I am famous for tangents, so just bring me back around. The platelets.
Yes.
Right? So I think the platelets are probably the coolest part of this, right? So they're blood cells, anucleated blood cells. They are responsible for clotting in your body, right?
Right.
What was fun about when I was looking into platelets, because these are things you learn in like, I don't know, 4th or 5th grade science class. Like your blood is white blood cells and red blood cells and platelets. It's actually a lot more than that, but that's sort of the basic bio. So I didn't realize this. When they reach a site of injury, they grow tentacles to stick to each other. Like they're kind of flat disc shaped in your body most of the time. And then they get kind of signaled to come to the site of an injury. And then in order to like stick together, they grow these little tentacles. And then they also create more chemicals to attract more platelets.
Yeah. They're fascinating and like so important for, like you said, like for, wound healing. And that's the hope, right? With this whole vampire facial is like, you'll have platelets come in and then it ultimately leads to, you have platelets, other bioactive stuff that's in the plasma. It stimulates healing, skin rejuvenation.
So the claims are, according to the American Society of Dermatology, that it reduces wrinkles, plumps up sagging skin, gets rid of deep creases, improves one's complexion, and diminishes acne scars.
Yes.
However, there have not been a lot of studies in humans to support those claims. And part of the reason is because they are classified as medical devices by the FDA. And medical devices don't have the same, they don't have, I don't want to say same stringent because it sounds like they're unregulated and they're not, but they just don't have the same requirements as a drug.
Right. And so it's like, well, we don't have to do clinical trials with this. We can just use it.
Yeah.
And so like actually getting the really, really strong data, really strong evidence is just like, people don't need to show that it's effective. They can just kind of go for it. And then a lot of it is patient testimonials saying, this worked so well. I feel so much more youthful. So apparently it takes a few weeks to a month or so for the results to kick in. Right. Yes. Yeah, which is interesting. And something actually that I thought was really interesting is that oftentimes fillers are actually injected at the same time so that people get these like immediate results while they wait for the PRP to purportedly like go to work. And, I'm saying purportedly because really just like there is not enough evidence at this point specifically for vampire facials that they actually work and create these big changes. There's just a lot of conflicting evidence. And then I think it's interesting that, I don't know, like it feels like if someone is also getting filler injections at the same time, I know the filler injections don't last forever, but also like when are they seeing, like when is the filler wearing off? When is the PRP maybe kicking in? It feels so convoluted. Like how are you able to actually come to
that would be terrible scientific design, right? For an experiment. Like you're adding a confounding variable. Like that's
right. Yeah. And people immediately, after PRP, if they've also gotten fillers and they have a certain way they want to look, they're like, oh, I look amazing. But it has nothing to do with the PRP.
Potentially. Yeah. I think it's hard to say one way or the other.
Yeah. I mean, I guess immediately it has probably nothing to do with the PRP, but like a few weeks later, it's also, I think, hard to discern what's what.
Exactly. What surprised me is that this is not confined to the realm of cosmetology, right?
No, not at all.
technique is used widely in sports medicine and orthopedics for like treating injuries and healing from surgery.
Yeah. I was surprised. I had no idea actually that this was used so widely before starting to do research. But I guess clinicians were first using PRP in the 80s and 90s to accelerate healing after plastic surgeries or jaw surgeries, I think were some of the earliest surgeries.
Interesting.
And I guess, like you said, it's used in so many things like orthopedics, regenerative medicine. I mean, we just talked about skin rejuvenation, rheumatoid arthritis, foot ulcers, like it just wild numbers of things. I guess when I was doing research, the thing that I found that it seems to have the most evidence for working in is osteoarthritis. But even then, that evidence is still somewhat limited. And there are some conflicting studies. I think in this case, right, that I think the biggest, trickiest thing with this is that there are studies that do show significance for this. I don't know about in vampire facials, but like PRP more generally for the other treatments. But then there are also conflicting studies that say, actually, it doesn't work. And I think the methods are so variable between those studies. So it's also not just saying, oh, does PRP work? But it's like, how long are you spinning the sample for? Are you adding anything to that sample?
Yes.
How many treatments are you giving someone? So it's just, there's just so much. And really, we need clinical trials for this, but that's not going to happen, I don't think.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. So in my day job, I help with reviews of clinical trials for informativeness. Like, is this trial going to show you something useful? And one of the big things is always sample size. Stats ends up being big in those things. But another thing is, are you using methods and endpoints that are universally recognized so that you can do a meta-analysis, right? Because this is the power of the science. Is like, it's usually not one individual trial, unless that trial is like gangbusters that shows something is working. It's usually different trials over time, but you have to have comparable methods and things you're looking for at the end for that to work. So that's fascinating. Well,
it is. No, it totally is. I mean, I say it's fascinating from like a very nerdy science standpoint, but I think it's important. It's really important. And not clear for this, right?
I think it would be surprising, especially in the medical device field, how much is not that it's not clear. It's just that a lot of it has been done from a sort of, this is working, so we're going to just keep doing it, as opposed to we're going to do a stringent clinical, like randomized, placebo-controlled, double-blinded clinical trial for this. And some things you can't do that for. Part of looking into this, I was like, this is a little, it's not inherently dangerous, except if you don't use clean needles.
The risk actually, like, unless, you are, of course, in the case where, like you said, you're not using clean needles, like the risk otherwise is pretty low. Like it seems like people will say, oh, there's a bit of pain or bruising or swelling after, and within a few days they're gone. It seems pretty minor.
And it's your own blood, so you're not going to have a reaction to it. It's not going to do anything like that. So it seems like in the benefit risk ratio, right? This one probably comes out.
Yes.
On the benefit side. So was there anything else that was surprising to you about this process?
I was surprised by, first, I guess, how long PRP has been used, like how it's been used for, around 40 years for various things. And then I guess the other thing that I found surprising, yet not so surprising, was the fact that fillers are usually injected at the same time.
That surprised me too, actually. Yeah. I still don't know how I feel about fillers. Like, if someone wants to do that, that's fine.
I actually think they freak me out, because I'm like, they don't stay there. What if there's all these, it's like, what if it moves somewhere in your face? I think plastic surgery generally, I think people should, of course, do what they want. It's, it's your body, do whatever makes you feel good. Hopefully that doesn't come from just a sense of pressure to look a certain way. It's hard to sort of separate the two. But if you really want to do something and you have the funds to do it, by all means, it's your body. But I do think that, like, putting things in your body that are not supposed to be there, unless it's for like a health reason where you need it, freaks me out, because it's just stuff where I'm like, what if it breaks or migrates or invades some other tissue, or it I'll just never be someone who has any of that stuff. I just can't. It freaks me out. I'd be walking around just like paranoid I was going to bump into something and something would go wrong. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yes.
I think I have a similar feeling about putting kind of foreign objects. Although technically, I guess I might have my ears pierced. So I have a tattoo. I have done it.
I don't know. It feels different when it's like something like with silicone fillers where, silicone just, I don't know. I like, it really freaks me out. I feel like if I had them in my lips or something else, I'd be like, I can't eat normally. I can't drink. Like, I think it's like, I would feel so hindered by a lot of procedures that I couldn't just live my life the way I'm living it. And that doesn't sound fun at all.
My husband and sometimes co-host is an engineer. And so he has like tubes of silicone that he uses for various things. And I know it's different. Like I know the medical grade is different, but I still look at that and go, no, thanks.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
So one thing that I didn't know, and that was really interesting, was that platelets are only found in mammals.
I had no idea. Oh, that's so fascinating. I wonder what is the version of platelets in like amphibians or something.
So I do know that complement is a very conserved system, like the whole complement system, which is also involved in like clotting and things like that. So maybe that's it. But
yeah, I don't know what the factors are for wound healing there.
Yeah, that was my little fun fact. So if it didn't have the fillers, would you get a vampire facial?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, yeah, so it doesn't, right. Like it doesn't weird me out because it is from your own body. I think, I mean, it's very expensive. If someone was like that, if a dermatologist was offering a vampire facial at a very reduced rate, out of curiosity, I might do it. Just to see without fillers and just I'd probably be the person who would take like 1 million photos of myself and I would take them every single day for, a month and then see if there's like any discernible difference. Like, is the darkness like underneath my eyes? Is it a little bit less dark? Like I'd probably try to find ways to evaluate my face pixel by pixel to try and say like N of 1, this seems to have worked or not. So I think I could see myself doing it one time to try it out. But I'm not going to pay $1,500 to do it. And I think if I was going to go to a dermatologist, it would cost at least that.
Yeah. And I would be suspicious if it was really like on sale or discounted, right? Because like that's
totally.
The thing with a lot of these cosmetic procedures is they are very pricey. And if you try to do it on the cheap, a lot of times that's where the complications arise.
Exactly. Actually, as I was researching this, I was then seeing like Groupon ads pop up for vampire facials because now all of my devices think I want a vampire facial. And it'd be like Groupon, it's only like $205 at this place. I'm like, I absolutely not. Like I know how much science equipment costs and even like vials cost. And there's like if you're cutting costs by that much for people to get this, where else are you cutting costs is sort of how I feel.
Yeah. I think that is an interesting point in general. If you haven't worked in a lab, kind of understanding the material, consumables costs for a lot of these things is challenging. And it is exorbitant.
It is. I mean, a bag of test tubes is hundreds of dollars, just like these plastic test tubes. And so, it's like one test tube. Maybe that bag has 50 test tubes. It's not cheap. And so if you're getting something super cheap, that's like a medical procedure. I don't know. It sets off some alarm bells for sure.
Same here. I think I would probably not do it. I'm fine with needles. The rest of my family is not, which is kind of funny. Like I don't have a strong urge to be like, let me try that out. Yeah. No, I wouldn't say I have an urge for sure. It's just more like, could I get it super duper cheap and then do my own like mini experiment? Yeah. Because I have to say, I got Botox treatment for my migraines for a little bit, and that stings. Yeah, I've heard it hurts, right? Yeah, it does hurt. Yeah. I mean, not a horrible amount, but I don't know what I thought going into it. But then she was doing it. I was like, oh, okay, this is uncomfortable. Yeah. A lot of beauty procedures are just, they're really painful. And I just don't have the interest in being in pain. I don't either. And I, like you said, sort of have a bit of a pushback around we're supposed to look a certain way, especially as women age. I'm like, you could back off a little bit as a society and letting women just age.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say, like, I think people should do whatever makes them happy.
Mm-hmm.
But I will say that when someone gets a lot of Botox, and it looks bizarre and for, subjective,
Yeah.
but I think it looks a little bizarre. And I think it makes people look way older than they actually are because when I see someone who's had a lot of Botox when they're 30, I immediately think they're in their mid 40s plus because it's just, there's like something about it. It's like plastic surgery face. Like sometimes, like I feel like when people get certain plastic surgeries, everyone starts to have the same face and everyone looks like they are perma 50 years old. And maybe if you're 70, you're like, amazing, I'd love to be perma 50 years old. But like, there's just something about it. And I find it, it just like, I just want to see what you actually look like. Like, I think that I just think people look better when they just have wrinkles. Like I just do. It's just, I don't know, this obsession with not having lines on your face is like, what? That's so
well,
dumb.
There's been a trend of celebrities, older female celebrities and male, because Simon Cowell did it too, dissolving their fillers.
Yes. I know, which I love.
And I think they look way better after.
Yeah, they do. I know. Yeah, it's interesting. But I also wonder, like, if you are part of a community where most of the people have fillers, have Botox, and you're the one who doesn't, like, your perspective of what looks normal as you age is so jaded. Like it's just, So it's hard to say that, right? Because I think a lot of celebrities hang out with other celebrities, see what their colleagues are looking like, and also have this pressure to not look like they're getting older, especially for women. Like when I talk about this, I'm mostly talking about women. There's just this unbelievable pressure. And I hope that older female actors are helping change that with some of these decisions, or younger ones who are saying, I don't want like quote preventative Botox. Like I just want smile lines to show that I've been smiling a lot. No,
I agree. A lot of times I actually do sit and think how grateful I am that my career does not depend on how I look.
Yes.
Largely.
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
How you look is, people judge you based on your looks because that is a fundamental human thing that we evolved to do over time as a safety mechanism, actually, right? I am not gonna like be that judged by how I look in what I do for work. Right. And I do feel for people who are in industries where that is very predominant, and that pressure just must be hard to carry.
It sounds terrible. I also feel like really, really fortunate that there is not pressure on me to like look a certain way.
Although I will say though, there's sort of reverse pressure in science, right? Like, I don't know if we're on quite a tangent, but I'm going to go with it because it's interesting. I don't know if you felt this, like if you're kind of too done up as a woman in science, there's sort of this like reverse judging of like, well, why she must not be serious. She must not be, real, because look she's wearing that or has too much makeup on or something like that. So it's interesting.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a thing. I think it's changing some because I think that there are female scientist role models who are saying like, I can wear a dress and have my hair done and wear makeup and actually be an incredible scientist. And these are not things that are mutually exclusive. There's still a lot of judgment. And I would say it's more from the old guard than the new.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this is the advantage of just having more women in science in general.
Yeah, absolutely.
Final question we like to ask. Do you have a favorite scientist?
This was really hard because I went back and forth thinking like, do I want to talk about a scientist who is alive and practicing science today? Do I want to talk about someone who has passed? And ultimately I decided on Carl Sagan, which maybe that's like a very typical answer. But for those who don't know, Carl Sagan was an astronomer, planetary scientist, and science communicator. So he's maybe best known as being a proponent of the search for extraterrestrial life. And of course, also for this PBS television series, Cosmos, A Personal Voyage, and the book Cosmos. But there are other books he wrote. He did so many different things, won so many different awards, was a researcher, right? Like did some really cool research as well. But what really draws me to Sagan is that he pushed back against the standards of the time where communicating your science to the public was seen as unnecessary and sometimes even seen as plagiarism because you're talking about someone else's work publicly.
Wow.
We all know that's what science communication is. And he was giving credit where credit was due is just this thing where it's like, how dare you speak about this work? That's not the work you did. But he faced a lot of backlash. He had these big names in the field writing letters to Harvard saying he shouldn't get tenure. One of those people was his former mentor, Harold Urey, who people might know because he was a Nobel Prize winning chemist. But in 1952, he also showed that a mixture of early Earth's atmospheric compounds, ammonia, methane, and hydrogen, if you expose them to electric sparks and water, they can actually produce amino acids, which are the building blocks of protein. So it's sort of like, how did life get started on Earth? Yeah. Oh, there was this,
maybe this way.
Argument about how could there have been the things that are needed? Like, where could protein have even come from? Like, how could we have, of course, a lot of experiments have come after that, but that was a really big pivotal one. Yeah. And so Harold Urey was Sagan's advisor at one point, and he wrote to Harvard being like, Sagan shouldn't get tenure, essentially. Jeez. Yeah. And so he was apparently denied membership in the National Academy of Sciences, reportedly because he was so active in the media and sharing science with the public. I will also say that I think Harold Urey, a decade or two later, came out saying really nice things about Carl Sagan's work, thankfully, but still, but it was there was a lot of tension, but none of that stopped Carl Sagan. And he's still one of the most recognized names in science, even 30 years, almost 30 years after his death. So that's why I like him. I think he really kept pushing forward and knew how important it was to communicate science, even when the people around him were saying, this is stupid, or this is a bad look for an academic scientist, or, he just said no, I know this is important. And he stuck to his guns and he did it. And I love that.
No, that's great. Maybe the father of modern science communication.
Yeah. There are a few, but for me, he's my favorite of them.
And his reach was extensive.
Amazing.
I mean, people definitely remember the show, and he's quoted all the time. That's awesome. Sam, it has been a pleasure to talk to you. I'm so glad we can make this happen. Thank you so much for coming on our show.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This has been a blast. I'm so glad I got to do some research into vampire facials and talk with you about SciComm and a whole bunch of other things. So it was really fun. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of LuxeSci. Please tell at least 2 people about this podcast. That is the best way to help us get noticed and find new listeners. A special thanks, as always, to my audio engineer, Dimos. Our theme music is Harlequin Mood by Burdy. As always, find us all over social media at LuxeSci Pod for fun facts, vocab words, and more. And please drop us a note and say hi.